Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at my IBM PS2 55SX personal computer from 1989. While this is working now to a fashion as it still has a few problems, it wasn't when I got it a couple of years ago. In today's video we'll be taking a look at this computer and what I did to get it working, along with some of its quirks and the strange way IBM did things back in the day, and we'll also take a look at its features and benefits and run some software on this computer to see how it performs. So for that and more, stay tuned and I'll see you right after the intro. So as I mentioned at the beginning there, I actually bought this 2 years ago now, and I paid £90 for the computer itself without even knowing if it works. Unfortunately, I don't have the original IBM CRT screen that would have accompanied this computer originally, but here I do have an IBM LCD monitor, a 10.4 inch, model number 9052V01. Unfortunately, however, it does have a couple of deep scratches on the LCD panel itself. While the maximum screen resolution of this monitor is only 640 by 480, it's more than enough for the onboard video graphics adapter. This is quite an unusual monitor in itself and quite hard to find now. I bought this a couple of years ago to go with this computer because I just didn't have the room for a CRT at the time. I also don't have the original keyboard and mouse that would have gone with this, but here I do have an IBM mouse along with an IBM keyboard from a later series of computer. At this point here the computer is actually up and running with all the modifications I've done to it since I've had it. So before we take a look at its features, let's have a look at its very limited connectivity. This computer boasts a more recent up-to-date PS2 adapter for the mouse and keyboard. Other computers of the time use a 5-pin DIN for the keyboard and a serial port for the mouse. On the right there you can see I've just plugged in the VGA cable, and next to that you have a parallel port and a full-size serial port. The VGA socket has a pin blanked out, so you won't be able to plug in a more recent monitor without removing that pin. The pin that needs to be removed contains a 5V power supply, which powers the EEPROM inside the monitor. This EEPROM carries the model number of the monitor and other details, which of course lets the computer know what it is for plug and play capabilities. Obviously this computer didn't have that back then, so it's not needed. And my example here also has the upgrade of a serial card, adding 2 serial ports. And on the left of the computer there you have your AC input, along with your voltage adjustment depending on your country. Power consumption is just 90 watts, and the weight of this base unit is just over 8 kilograms. Over the 2-year period when this model came out, there are actually 5 variations of it available, but they all sported the 386SX processor with its 16 MHz speed. The stock RAM was just 2 MB, expandable to 8 MB. My machine has a 4 MB stick. One of the first annoyances I noticed with this computer was the fact that you can only use the IBM RAM with it. Unfortunately, other 72-pin SIM memory modules aren't compatible with this, but apparently there is a modification that can be done to make them compatible. They all have a standard video graphics adapter which supports 320 by 200 and 256 colours, or 640 by 480 with just 16 colours. IBM also did a optional graphics card, model number 8514, and this will support a resolution of up to 1024 by 768 pixels and 256 colours at 43.5 Hz interlaced. And they also did a monitor to support this resolution. 4 of the models came with a 1.44MB floppy disk drive and also a hard drive starting at 30 MB with the 55SX 855031. Then there was a 40 MB available, 60 MB and 80 MB. My machine here has an 80 MB drive. These use the ESDI system, Enhanced Small Disk Interface. This is another annoyance with this computer, certainly in this range, because this has a peculiar card edge adapter. I've not seen any other computers use this, it just seems to be IBM. This was designed by Maxtor Corporation in 1983 and will be a follow-on to the ST412506 interface. ESDI improved on the ST506 by moving certain parts that were traditionally kept on the controller, such as the data separator. This would allow more connectivity, such as removable disks and tape drives. ESDI was quite popular during the mid to late 80s, because SCSI and IDE drives were only just starting to come about. But ESDI could handle data rates of up to 10, 15 or 20 megabits per second, as opposed to the ST506 top speed of just 7.5 megabits. And many high-end SCSI drives of the era were actually high-end ESDI drives, with SCSI bridges integrated on the drive. By 1990, SCSI had matured enough to handle the high data rates and the multiple types of drives, and ATA was quickly overtaking ST506 in the desktop market. These two events made ESDI even less important over time, and by the mid-1990s, ESDI was no longer in common use. Trying to find one of these drives today on their own is actually quite hard, because not many of them work now, and as I mentioned before at the beginning of the video, these also suffer with the leaky capacitors. A further annoyance with this range of computers is the fact they don't use a standard floppy disk connector. It's actually a 34-pin affair, which also contains the 12 and 5 volts that you need, like on a regular PC floppy disk drive. They also did two other models, two diskless models, workstations. These would have a token LAN card that would run straight off of a IBM server. There was no disk drives whatsoever, not even a floppy. There's actually two variants of this, an LEO and an LTO. Not quite sure what the differences are. I've been trying to find out just how much this would have cost back in the day. Got a couple of old PC magazines. This one here is from August 1993. I did manage to find out some memory prices, starting at £64 just for 1 megabyte, and a whopping £355 for just 8 megabytes. And then in this other magazine here from 1987, which again is a bit too early, the other one's too late, I did find a nice picture in here of a previous IBM computer, although it's not actually advertising the computer itself, it's actually advertising the monitor, which is a ESO FlexiScan CRT monitor. Still nice though to see some pictures of these computers as they were in pristine condition back in the day, with a nice clean keyboard. I did, however, manage to find some prices of some previous models, including the add-ons. Looking at this here, the Model 50 was $3,595 back in 1987. Today in 2025 you're looking at around about $9,700 or £7,800. This model did extremely well for IBM, selling over 1 million units worldwide, and its lifespan was between 1989 and 1992. Right, let's get this computer open, shall we, and take a look inside. I know you're all eager to see what's in here. There are actually only two screws to get into this case, and they are the star type. One of the screws on this computer won't actually go back in fully, and as you can see there's a lock there to stop the computer case being opened by unauthorised personnel. I actually remember a time back in the early 90s when people were going out stealing CPUs out of computers because they were so expensive. Once you've undone those two screws, it's just a case of sliding the lid back, but it is quite grippy on this machine. And there you go, we're in. Just on the lid there you can see there's a date code or stamp. I think it's 20th of June 1991. So this is one of the later models. On the right hand side there you have the ESDI hard drive. To the left is the floppy disk drive. And the expansion card there is the serial port. One of the things I do love about this computer is how modular it is in its design. To get the hard drive and floppy disk out, there are no screws involved whatsoever. It's just a case of removing the two front panels that are just clipped in place. And then once you have those two front panels removed, you can then just lift up the clasp at the front of the drives and push it forward from behind. And then once you remove the cable, you can release it completely. We'll take a closer look at those drives later and just what I did to get them working again. And on the side here you can see the full length serial card I mentioned before. There's actually space on this computer for 3 cards on the MCA riser card. Sadly there's no ISA slots on this computer, so you can't just plug in a regular sound card. And just look at the size of this thing, just for an extra 2 serial ports. IBM decided to go with its own system, the microchannel architecture, MCA for short, which is proprietary to them. This was used in most of their PS2 systems up until the mid-1990s. The computer's speaker actually plugged into this board as well, along with the ESDI edge card connector for the hard drive. I also have a IBM Model 30 which is not working. The riser card on that one actually has ISA slots, and there's also a lithium-ion battery for the CMOS settings and date and time. And at the back of the computer there you can see the floppy disk controller and 2 RAM slots. Sadly one of the RAM slots has a broken off pin. While the computer still boots, if I try to load some software, the computer just freezes. So I'm having to use slot 2 instead. And here is that 4MB IBM RAM stick, model number 68x6343, which again is proprietary to this system. Another annoyance with these IBM computers is the fact they use a Dallas chip, which has a built-in battery to keep the date and time and CMOS settings. Eventually the battery in this will die, and then the computer will not boot anymore because it will put the dreaded error code 161 and 163 on the screen, which means the date and time is incorrect, and the IBM reference disk is needed to carry on any further, so you can initialise the system again. With a regular PC, you just get a CMOS error on boot, and you can get past this by pressing F1 to continue or F2 to enter setup, but not with IBM. You do need that reference disk to carry on. Thankfully, a substitute has been created by Necroware, which has a removable button cell, so you'll never have this problem again with the battery going flat. And that empty socket is for the NVRAM for the 55LS diskless workstation. And here we have the Intel 386SX 60MHz processor soldered directly to the board. Notice there was no heatsink here or fan, because it's just not needed. And next to that is the empty socket for the optional maths coprocessor. I have actually ordered one of these, but I can only find one in China, and apparently it's going to take 6 weeks to arrive. And on the left there, that is the VGA controller, and those 8 ICs in the middle, I believe they are the 640k RAM, although I'm not 100% sure on that. Another strange thing with this IBM computer is the power switch setup. It uses a metal rod to attach to the switch at the back in the actual power supply itself. On the models, the power supply comes all the way down to the right, and the switch is actually right at the front of the computer. And here we have the 90-watt power supply. Before we go on any further, let's have a look at the floppy disk and hard drive and see what I did to get them working. This particular drive is made by Mitsubishi, and the model number is MF355C-599MQ1 with a date code of January 1992. When I first got this PC, the floppy disk drive was actually working. When I pulled this out a couple of weeks ago, it stopped reading disks. I noticed that the capacitors had leaked out on the board. I swapped these out and it started working again, but then during some tests suddenly the drive stopped working altogether. I had it resting in its caddy area there, and with that being a conductive surface, I'm wondering if a short happened, but I guess I'll just never know. Luckily I had a spare drive, and this one also had leaking capacitors. Unfortunately one of the traces came away from the board and I had to do a little bodge wire, but I'm pleased to say obviously now it is working. And here is the infamous ESDI drive. Like I mentioned before, these are quite hard to get hold of now, although at the moment while I'm making this video there does seem to be a few knocking about on eBay. Model number WD380S, capacity 80 megabytes. I've never actually seen an edge card like that before on any other computers. Apparently though, upon doing some further research, I found that Dell and Compaq also use this system. This has 3 capacitors on the board which also leaked. Here's a little bit of footage here of how badly they were leaking, and then we'll have a look at taking this drive apart and see what was involved with replacing them. As you can see, when you magnify these areas, they're very crusty in places, though I must say that not all the pads, or both pads on each capacitor, were bad. It just seemed to be one on either side. But I thought while we're here we might as well replace them all because they're going to go eventually. The drive was still powering up okay, but I remember when I did the reference disk 2 years ago, the disk reported that the hard drive was faulty. There are 2 ribbon cables on this drive attached from the top to the bottom. This one on the end here seemed to be a little bit corroded. Something was crystallised along that edge there, not quite sure what, but once I pried it open slightly the contacts looked quite clean, so I have no idea what that was. Then it's a case of removing that disk caddy from the bottom, the tray there, and then there are some screws to release the PCB from the hard drive itself, and another ribbon cable underneath. And there you go, we're in. Just that other ribbon cable there now to release. Got to be very careful with these, actually they tear ever so easily. Very clean looking drive, no corrosion whatsoever on it. Same goes for the PCB. Not cased in dust, nothing, just very, very clean. So I'm not sure where that bit of corrosion came from in that socket. I'm so glad there are only 3 capacitors to replace. I'm not very good at surface mount stuff. I've not done an awful lot yet, but these didn't come off too badly. And that's the new ones in place. Just going to do a quick continuity check just to make sure my solder joints are okay. Then it's a case of reassembling. And obviously taking the time because you don't want to end up damaging anything. So now that I have a working floppy disk drive, it's time to try that hard drive out and see if it will boot from it. I was very excited about this. I've got some footage here that I did the first time I tried it. Not the best quality, but it's a memorable moment for me because I got to see the contents of this drive for the first time. This computer certainly makes a clunk when you turn it on, and just listen to the sound of that old hard drive. Imagine working in an office back in the day with 10s or more of these computers all running at the same time. I hadn't gone through the reference disk at this point, so I'm still getting up all those errors there, which we'll look at later on in the video. So at this point I realised the hard drive wasn't going to boot, so I thought maybe it's blank. So I put a version of DOS in on a floppy disk just to get to the command prompt. You forget just how loud these old hard drives are, especially one this age, so I'm going to turn the volume down at editing so it doesn't drive anybody mad. Just then you could hear the hard drive being accessed, so I was quite confident at this point that it was working. I did shorten the sequence of booting from the floppy disk. And now for the moment of truth, will it let me access C drive? And it has, excellent. Time to do some data excavating. I was so pleased that it was working. I've never actually seen one of these drives in action before. Interestingly, looking at some of the dates back then, it says 2019 on some of them. So I wonder if somebody else had this working before I got hold of it. And there's the directory of the DOS. The drive's been labelled as IBM DOS 5. It's always very interesting going through old hard drives, especially from the DOS days, seeing what kind of programs are on there. Because I booted from a different version from DOS from the A drive to what's actually on the hard drive, some of these programs won't work. So I thought I'd try and boot from the C drive at this point to see what would happen, and here we go. I was amazed to see this. Jaguar. So I guess this computer belonged to a Jaguar dealership. But this is as far as I got with this program. None of the keys worked, nor did a mouse. Still very interesting though, seeing a piece of software like this from so long ago. I think it was dated 1990 or 1991. It probably hasn't been accessed for years. I suspect this piece of software probably ran as a terminal, but obviously as the computer's no longer attached to anything else, it's not going to load. It was probably used to access a parts database for ordering bits for Jaguar cars. So I think I spent about half an hour going through the hard drive just trying to find other programs. Eventually I opened up a DOS shell and I found Money Manager, one of the programs I found, amongst others, and a couple of games. We'll have a look at those next. And at this point I found that game, Gorilla. It still amazes me that you can access an old hard drive that's 20-30 years old or more and find programs on there and they still work. I've not run ScanDisk on this drive yet, but so far it seems to be performing well. I've not had any issues of anything crashing. Well, I've never actually played this game before, never even heard of it, so I had no idea what I was doing. So I'll just skip through this a little bit, because at first off I was trying all kinds of things to get it to work, until I realised what I had to do. Finally I hit something. So we have a game called Nibbles, or some of us will remember it as Snake on the old Nokia phones. I'm just going to zap through this quickly in editing. So when I go to boot this computer now after setting the date and time, I'm still getting a couple of error codes here. 201 and 164. The error code 164 indicates a memory error or a system board error, and the 201 error also means the same thing. Okay, let's take a look at the IBM reference disk. The reference disk basically is to configure the system, particularly for the systems with the microchannel architecture, MCA, providing essential information needed to properly set up the system and its hardware components. So for example, if you add like a graphics card or a sound card, you'll need to go through the setup procedure for this disk to reconfigure the system, so that it knows which settings to use in the IRQ settings and stuff like that. This all gets saved to the BIOS. And notice as well when you do this, something's added to the reference disk. Because if you don't use the reference disk after you made a change like that, the new card you put in may not work, or the system may not boot correctly, or you'll probably get an error code. It also includes diagnostic tools to test the system functionality and show up any errors you may have and give an explanation. And also adjust the date and time. The date and time errors I mentioned before is error code 161 and 163. At this point I'd actually dealt with that because I put in that new Necroware CMOS chip. An interesting fact about the IBM PS2s and probably others as well is they actually have built-in BASIC. If you just press F1 when you get that error screen, it will take you right into BASIC. So right off the bat there you can see I'm getting a memory size error and it's asked me if I want to run the configuration, but I've not changed anything so I'm going to say no. There are several options presented to you in this disk once you get to this point. Back up the reference diskette, set configuration, set features, copy and options diskette. Move the computer is basically parking the hard drive heads. Test the computer and display revision levels. I'm loading the test part of the disk here because I'm still getting some error codes when I boot the computer. I shall speed this test up in editing so it doesn't go on too long. I'll probably make a separate video demonstrating the IBM reference disk in real time, so anybody else out there who wants to know how it works can see what's involved and a more thorough demonstration. Well, everything tested just fine. The floppy disk put an error up because I didn't format a disk, but as you can see I'm getting an error code there upon post boot. This flashes up on the screen very quickly when the system is doing the memory test. I have tried some other RAM sticks that I have already, 72 pin sims, but as I mentioned before, only the IBM ones will work, unless you could modify a non-IBM memory module. Upon viewing the configuration of the system, everything looks absolutely fine. Okay, so we've run tests using the IBM reference disk. Let's try another piece of software, a piece of software called Checkit, which I only discovered recently. This is a DOS-based application. I'm not sure if there are more recent versions of this, there may be, but this one here will show you quite a lot of information about the computer. Let's have a quick look at the system info and the configuration. Interesting that it says there's no mouse when there actually is one attached. Next, the memory map. And now let's test the memory. This takes a couple of minutes, so I'm going to speed this up. So as we can see, we've got a couple of failures there, and 68 errors encountered. That's a heck of a lot. All these different parity errors, all these different address lines. So there's definitely something wrong with that extended memory. But the computer's still working, which is rather odd. So far everything I've loaded has worked. Just going to run a system board test now to see if that shows anything else up. This is quite quick. And that seems to all be okay. It says skipped there on 3 items, so probably because it doesn't have them maybe. So yes, it looks like it's definitely a faulty memory stick then on this extended RAM. So I guess I'll need to find some different RAM for this, or do a modification to a standard 72 pin sim. Because as I mentioned before, the standard ones won't work as they are. It only works directly with the IBM replacement. Quick look at your benchmark there. As you can see, it's a lot faster than the IBM PCXT. I'll have to redo this test when I get the maths coprocessor when it eventually turns up. Okay, now that's all out of the way, let's do a bit of gameplay, shall we? Got Duke Nukem here on a floppy disk. I'm just going to copy the whole thing to the hard drive so it's a bit faster at loading, and then we'll have a blast on that. It's been a while since I played this actually. This monitor is not very bright at all, it's quite hard to film from. I bet the contrast ratio is really low. Obviously this only has the onboard sound, but to be honest with you, this computer's speaker is more than enough for this game, and it still sounds quite good. There was an audio adapter made for this MCA system, but it's super rare. and when they do turn up they're really expensive, so I'll probably never own one. Not sure if the audio was glitching on that game actually, it sounded a little bit odd in places. And there you have it, the IBM PS2 55SX. I've had this computer a couple of years now, and I must admit when I first bought it I kind of regretted buying it because of all of its quirks and all of its proprietary parts. Hard drive, floppy drive, RAM, and obviously the MCA connector, and not having any ISA slots. But so now I've been working on this for a couple of weeks, it's actually grown on me. In the future video I'll probably have a look at that RAM, do a RAM upgrade, see if we can modify some standard 72-pin sims and see if we can get it to work with this computer. I actually bought a graphics card for this while I was making this video. I shall be making a separate video about that, the 8514A, a very interesting looking graphics card. So stay tuned for that. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching that with me. As always, thanks for watching, and until the next video, I'll be seeing you. And if you did enjoy watching this video, you may want to take a look at some of my other videos on similar themes. I'm always buying something on eBay, some more piece of technology, and trying to repair it. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thanks for watching.